hallway actually are in the choir, so I really love them. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton. We are glad to have all of you here. So I'm just got it thing. I'm just going to do a check for those who are curious. We have 9 screens, and a couple of them are us, but we have about 10 folks online, and we have the people who are wanting to be here this morning. We are a congregation that starts right off with music, and I will invite you to rise in body or spirit for Spirit of Life, and we are thrilled to have Abby West playing today. Please rise.
Yep.
Welcome.
Yep.
I don't believe any of our board members picked up the board announcement role, so I will gladly fill that. 3 things to remember. 1, your summer worship team would love your ideas for worship. You don't have to necessarily lead the service. We've got a couple open weeks, but I've also got the weeks I'm preaching, and I'd love to know what you want to hear about. So we've got our schedule. That's great. Number 2, if you enjoy having a bit of a social hour, water, lemonade outside after Sunday services, we've helped Steve out, we've added some sign-ups out in the foyer. If you could help as an usher, or you could help as a greeter, or if you could help as tech host, please just sign up for a week. It's pretty much just being on a Zoom call and monitoring that. So please step in there. And the 3rd piece is we will have childcare all summer. So if you know folks with family and friends, it's not formal RE, but it's a place where our kids will have a bit of learning and a bit of fun. So welcome to our service today. Now of our prelude. What a gentle way, Abby, to welcome us here today. I'm Reverend Sue Browning. I have served this congregation now for 9 years, and it is lovely to have everyone here. Right before the service, Peter Paul, who's ushering, was looking around for extra name cards. I said, oh, we probably won't have too many visitors, and yet we do. It is wonderful, and we need to buy some more sticky labels. Unitarian Universalism is not a place where you can believe anything you want. You may hear that. You can find your own path. There's space for atheists, there's space for you Christians, there's space for folks that find inspiration in many ways. What we share is a sense and a commitment to name what we value and to take that seriously. And what we come together for, the reason we come together each week, is to inspire and to help one another stay on that path. Different weeks will fit differently for you depending on what's going on in your life, but we come to create a community where we can be on the journey together. I'm going to put my husband on the spot because he's sitting right in front of me and ask him if he will physically light the chalice today. It works so much better if you don't ask ahead of time. Just go ahead and light the chalice. Ooh, with one of those candles, sorry. And go ahead and light it, and then I can do that. Thank you. We light our chalice today in a spirit of openness, in not knowing what will happen, yet daring to receive a new idea, a new experience, sustenance for our minds and hearts. We come with an attitude of humility, knowing how much we need one another, how alone we can be in the world, and how vulnerable we are if we face life only by ourselves. We come today in a spirit of love, seeking warmth, fellowship in the hands of those around us and the faces of those around us. Please rise in body or spirit for our hymn, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. It is one of my favorites. So please rise. I invite us to remain standing as we share in saying the covenant of our fellowship. At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton, we seek to nurture spiritual and intellectual growth for all ages and to be actively involved in community outreach and service.
cherishing diversity, and celebrating our oneness with all humanity, we covenant to support each other in the spirit of compassion, respect, and love. Please be seated. Throughout our service today, we're going to be thinking about renewal. What is it that renews you when you need it most? Where do you go for renewal? It's something I'm thinking that's a little bit more than just how do you rest. It's something about some ideas, some places that you can figure out what's next for you. For our meditation today, we draw on wisdom for the ages. We draw on language from Deuteronomy, chapter 6, adapted by Peter Rabel. Consider these words. We build on foundations we did not lay. We warm ourselves at fires we did not light. We sit in the shade of trees we did not plant. We drink from wells that we did not dig. We profit from persons that we did not know. We are ever bound in community. Let's take a moment, reflect on connections, reflect on foundations, reflect on where you draw. Where are the roots that you draw from when you consider renewal? For these many resources, for the many wells that we draw from, we offer gratitude, and we wonder, where might they take us? If there are roots, when do the wings form? We build our community week after week by sharing our personal joys and sorrows. It's not a time of announcements or statements of, all sorts of ways we can state our frustrations with the world, but it is a time to connect with where your heart is, just to share in a sentence or so what your experience has been this week, your joys, losses, milestones, feelings. I light this first candle today, recognizing that the world shifted in some big ways this last week. There are many reactions to the Supreme Court's decision, but the candle, let it hold for right now, our feelings. I know they are varied. Feelings of frustration and anger, sadness, and an understanding that we all approach complex topics differently. So we light that first candle, holding our experiences of this past week. Let's just take a moment and hold what we've heard, hold where we've been over this last year, because a year ago we still weren't meeting in person. We didn't know all the folks that are here. We hold these joys and sorrows and those in your hearts in love. Our community does require financial support. For all who pledge, thank you so much. For all who would like to give this morning, to give, if you still want to do something for outreach, you can flag that somehow. But as a general matter, the ways this congregation is supported is amazing. And we accept with love your offering this morning. So a sermon today that began with a service description I wrote a month ago. Those little things that you see that you get in your reminders, you get in your newsletters. Somebody has to write them and we stick them in, we make up a title. And I began with something like, the news is hard and the patterns of polarization are overwhelming. I wrote it a month ago, but it was a pretty good chance that it would be accurate today. In just 1 week, we've had more January 6th hearings. We've had 2 major Supreme Court decisions, and the reactions have been loud. I know for many of us, having been at quite a few different meetings and with different groups of UUs in Easton and Chestertown, these actions have drawn our energy and focus. So I want to start out by first saying that not all the news has been hard. I want to lift up, there was new gun safety legislation that was seen as impossible just weeks ago. Lots of debate, could it have been more, could it have been less? But when I've listened to some of the sponsors, they believe it will save some lives. Sometimes you find the coalitions and you do what you can do. There have been joyful images from Pride in the news, on our Facebook feeds, on the clothes that we are wearing. The rates of acceptance and understanding are shifting. And Juneteenth is getting different types of press, and we talked last week about our need to honor the holiday by telling the stories well. So communities being built all around us, and yet that hard news is often sucking us in. So I've been going through the filter. My filter this week has been attending the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. Okay, I'm attending it virtually, but I have signed into most of the conferences and workshops. It's actually going on as we speak out in Portland, Oregon. So this sermon is a little bit about Unitarian Universalism and what I know they're talking about out in Portland. It's been a really interesting filter for the news. And I will note that next week, rather than come here, what you're going to do is they have an amazing worship service they're doing this afternoon at our time at GA. We will play that on our YouTube channels and you'll get amazing worship preached by Gretchen Haley and just incredible music next week. So what is General Assembly about? It's a different part of my community. It's something anyone here is welcome to attend at any point. But it starts with a blur. You start on a Monday and they have the ministers gather first, and then you have gatherings right through tomorrow, or through today, I'm sorry. And it's a blur. There are child dedications. In our tradition, we do something that's similar to baptism, but we dedicate children, we name children. Ministers' kids don't have a home congregation often, and that gets done. There are celebrations for people completing 25 years and 50 years of ordination. There's messages from our president. Here's what's sort of cool, is I get to be a congregant of sorts. I do little to prepare, and I benefit from colleagues and lay members and leaders who put forward their best learning and their hearts. There's a lot of shared experience, and I think depending on what your job is and whether you work on something sort of like an academic year, there's a lot of year-end reflection and weariness, likely some relief. So it's a ton of content and emotions and worship and everything coming at you. And even in all its busyness, I find it as a time of renewal. And when I look through my notes from this year, and I've been to all but one GA over the last 10 years, we call it GA, that's General Assembly, I think there are two questions that come to me when I sort through my notes. I'm reminded to ask and to take the time to ask these two questions. Where is love calling me? And where is love calling us? So I translate where is love calling me something like this. If I peel back all of the clutter, hang on just a second. Let's see what we got.
It's Kyle, my friend.
That's fine. Welcome, welcome. Somebody wanders in. No drama here, Kyle, but if you could stand up and if you can tell us your life story in no more than 5 minutes, that would be there. So we were just talking about the way I translate the phrase, where is love calling me? It's something like this. If I peel back all the churn in my head and my heart, and I get down to the essence of what I care the most deeply about, in what direction should I face for now? I ask the question personally. I think sometimes we need to just sort of focus on one thing. That's sort of where love is calling us. I ask the questions and I think of congregation and community. I ask the questions and I think of our country and the world. But what I want to be clear about is when I ask the question, or when I hope you will all ask that question, where is love calling me? Or when others ask it of me, it's not about lists and projects. It's not about an invitation to get really specific. That might come. But I think it's about pausing and listening and wondering, where on the horizon, that big horizon, sunrise, sunsets, that magnolia blossom that's out there, where do I need to focus now? It's a time of letting go. What's beyond my direct control? What's beyond our direct control? And thinking some big thoughts, feeling some deep realities, because I don't think we find the answer if we're not sitting in our hearts, if we're not sitting in our place of gut. So I think that's part of what renewal's about. And for me, maybe it's the change of pace of being at GA and different people, but somehow that's a place I can clear my head and this sprinkling of insights and fresh ways of seeing. There's something new. And maybe in the mix of all that, there's some glimpse of hope. Some place that's mixed in with renewal. So what helps you find fresh ways of seeing life? How do you shift routines? Does that help? Where is it not only that you get rest, but that you see new possibilities? Here's another part of the experience of being at General Assembly. For me, I feel like I've been dropped in sort of, I'm thinking, Doug, of a science fiction sermon you did many years ago. I'm thinking when I'm at General Assembly, I'm dropped into a Unitarian Universalist movement of energy with its own language, sets of priorities, and it's actually very different than my experience being with this congregation or being with the Chestertown congregation. Unitarian Universalists over the last years have been focused on the internal changes. So they get boring and they get sort of technical about what it will mean to be an anti-racist organization. What it will mean to be an anti-oppressive organization. What do we need to change internally and externally to be part of making a change in the world? And I want to focus a little on the internal focus. The UUA is, 200 employees. They're up in Boston, and they help all the different congregations. We've probably got about 1,000 congregations all around. And what we found in the studies that were done over 3 years, we talked about this a lot last year. We talked about it last summer. This book called Widening the Circle of Concern is that as an organization, we have lots of white supremacy patterns. Lots of ways we do the business of being a denomination that don't open space the way they could. So the focus is you still need to do the external work. You need to be looking at policies and marching for justice and working in communities, but you also need to be looking internally. It is the backdrop of everything at General Assembly, and it's about thinking in new ways. The other thing we're reminded about at General Assembly is whatever it's on your list, wherever you're facing, is you can't just put the work down. You can pass it on, you can share it, you can work with other leaders, you can do it in different ways. But if we want to sustain this broad hope, we need to be doing so in different ways, because I think part of our hopelessness comes when we don't see change, when things keep happening the same way over and over. So that's part of the world I've been living in this week. One of the speakers who was incredibly powerful is Reverend Dr. Michael Slack. He gave something called the Berry Street Lecture. And he was speaking as an African American who goes through as a leader. He's got a law degree, he's got a minister's degree, he's got all the different pieces. And he basically says, we need to think of our congregations, those covenants that we post all around. And when we make the promises to one another about how we're going to be together, we need to be clear that when someone's out of covenant, when someone does something harmful, when somebody is not letting in new leaders, not making space for new norms and differences, it's not covenant if we're not naming it. If we're not finding ways to tell folks that was not welcoming, that was not inclusive, and to say, come back in, but come back in right. Not that there's a right or wrong way to be, but there is a way not to be. It is not okay to be an extension of the hate and demonization we see in the world. I know as a congregation, we've talked quite a bit about the eighth principle. The eighth principle is sort of a formal way that different congregations have said, are we part of this mix? And at this point, there's a lot of excitement at GA. About a quarter of the congregations, just over 200, have done a year's worth of work to say our congregation is committed to doing this work. Maybe it's something we'll consider next year. Another person who spoke. How many folks here have heard of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist? Small handful. So it was written by a guy named Abraham Kendi, and he was our speaker last night. And he also wrote Stamped from the Beginning. Other people heard of that book. So these are books that look deeply at the history and what is causing change to get stuck. So the scene you have to picture last night is when Bill says he's a good sport, we're eating dinner, we get the Ware lecture on my PC as we eat dinner last night. But what he focuses on is we do need to have that place, that sense of vision of where we're going if we're going to get change. One thing he said that was really interesting is when you think about all the racist messages that are out there. He says, it's not as much about calling somebody a racist or not a racist, but what are the racist behaviors you're seeing? Think about the producers of the information. In his view, they will not probably change. But then think also about the consumers. Way more opportunities for dialogue for folks that have not originated the messages. All of this is a question. I've wondered about what it means to have everyone at the table. How are these questions influencing our UU faith? I've wondered next year if we should just have a chair sitting about here, sort of the Elijah chair, the chair of who else we could imagine in the room as we give our sermons and offer our music and look. What is it going to take to get age diversity, to get all sorts of places where we might be a message for someone to be a congregant in the future? This next point is so nerdy, and I'm going to claim it. What?
I said saddle up.
Saddle up. Here's another thing. So you've got this great big assembly of all these people changing bylaws, changing processes. People here have been to conferences. Here's some things the UUA is no longer doing. They're not using Robert's rules. Collective gasp should be about right. It's not that there's not a process, but the goal has been to get information into people's hands earlier, to get it in plain English, and not have all the positioning done by I motion to, I shut the discussion, I table this, I table that. It wasn't fostering dialogue to get different opinions in the room, and they've actually changed the model of how they run our association. It's taken about 5 years. The other thing they use is something called a progressive stack. Like I said, it's nerdy, and it matters. So when you have questions, so they bring up something, should we adopt this motion of immediate witness on abortion? If you want to speak to that issue, you've been to things where they have a pro mic and a con mic, still have that, and they still have ways to do that. If you identify as being from a historically marginalized group, or a group that often doesn't get heard, which sometimes can be folks of color, a lot of focus on trans folks right now in different places. If you identify there, you get to speak first. The progressive stack. Those voices, if you're going to center the voices, you need a process to make sure that doesn't happen. Everybody will get to speak, but sometimes it helps to get the voices that are least heard in the middle. Unitarian Universalists can be called overly politically correct. It's a reaction. And after a few years of seeing inclusive process modeled, of 10 years of going to GA, I think we're also the icebreakers. I think we're sometimes out there modeling things that you'll see broadly in the world years from now. If you want things to change, you need to change the way you do things, and it happens with intent. I think hopelessness, as I said, comes when we don't see change, and we sometimes miss it when it's in those processes. And there has been drama, for real. Since 2019, I haven't shared a lot of it with the congregations. It hasn't really come up to me as questions, but there were a group of ministers and leaders, they're known as the Gadflies. Self-named, that's what they called themselves, and they basically believe this focus on anti-racism and anti-impression and doing it intentionally is heading Unitarian Universalism in the wrong direction. The group basically would like to see the Unitarian Universalism they were comfortable with before. There's a general sense, and I even can understand the argument made for it, that ignoring difference, in the end, the world might be better. So the group ran a few alternate candidates for the board, contested seats. And one of the candidates suggested that all these young radicals, people like Reverend Slack that I mentioned earlier, and a lot of you hear the term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, all these young radicals, some of which are 60 and 70 years old, that these people of color could go form a separate church and not disturb what's working well. The candidates didn't win, and here's part of the challenge. It's not that the idea is rejected, but that the group will not enter into dialogue and bring ideas into deeper conversation. So there's been some palace intrigue of sorts, but it's been more than discomfort. The Black leaders of Unitarian Universalism, known as Blue, have been faithfully working for deep change, and they've been disparaged and harmed by these groups. Stories were presented that were not true by any objective look at the timeline and the facts. It's not just another view when there isn't accountability. So we know of the polarization in the broader society, the lack of listening and understanding, but the messing up of truth-telling happens all around us. Our faith calls us to be clear about that. We're not immune to distorted truth and lies. So where is love calling us? Where is it calling me? Part of the answer is in a commitment to truth. I think we do each know what that is. But there's also some learning that one group in the world is not going to ever save another group. That's more of a salvation theology. A different way to look at theology is to think of freedom theology, to think of liberation theology, which takes us back to none of us are okay if someone is not okay. Where is that mutuality as we figure out where love is calling us? So I circle back to the news, to the Supreme Court decisions, the violence, and GA reminds me that my faith needs to help me digest these scenarios. It's my reminder not to demonize, to listen, and then to state my truth clearly. And sometimes that will involve a fight. It will involve advocacy. It will involve being clear. So much of GA brings me back to those basics. And I want to close with one of the messages that helped me think about renewal. Because I think renewal, wherever you're trying to renew your life, maybe it doesn't speak to some of these bigger UU places, but I think we're all looking sometimes for the sweet spot. Where do the needs of the world, the needs of the family, the needs of ourself meet the places that bring us joy? The goal is not to put ourselves into some torture place that we can't sustain momentum, but to find a place that we can renew again and again and act from our deepest values. Maybe love is calling you to something really narrow in your family. Maybe it's about doing a little bit less, some deep focus. Maybe it's renewal that you have the energy to try something a little different, to make the world a little different. So I want to close with the words of the candidate who won the board election. She offered this message. Her name is Justine Sullivan. I remember a beautiful worship, and she wrote this last night. I remember that beautiful worship service on Sunday morning of GA 2019. That was out in Spokane. Worship leader Reverend Martin Valentin invited all of the people of color onto the stage, saying something like, "We are now calling to the center all who have been marginalized." Reverend Sullivan says, "I was watching alongside members of the congregation I was serving. We wept at the beauty of that moment, in the power of seeing the beloved faces of the BIPOC siblings who have so long been on the margins. Reverend Sullivan says it's understandable to be afraid, to be wondering, is there still a place for me? She says, I say yes. There is a place for all who yearn for a faith that can be relevant and committed to justice, grounded in the belief that civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free until everybody's free. Let us move forward together. Now is the time. Where do you go to find your fresh perspectives? Where do you go to find gratitude? Where do you feel less alone? Where are you going to face for this next little bit? Where is love calling you? Where is love calling us? May it be so, and blessed be. We'll post those questions all around. And if folks have questions on GA or would like to see some of the recorded speeches, some of them I have access to, and I can do that. So our final hymn is With Heart and Mind. It's hymn number 300. Please rise and body your spirit. Please be seated. I encourage us, it's a beautiful day out. If you want to have some social time outside, there's probably some water in the refrigerator, it's definitely cups. Go outside and ask one of those questions. Where is love calling me? Where is love calling us? Our closing words start with a quote from Martin Luther King, slightly adapted. He says, I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their body, education and culture for their minds, and dignity and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what the self-centered have torn down, other-centered people can build up. We go into our world hopefully daring to receive a new idea, a new experience, a new bit of light. May you find renewal this summer and this week. And may we then take our dusted off selves and stay focused on where love is calling us. Go in peace. Go in love. Go knowing love surrounds you wherever you may go. Go in peace.